I just want to talk about a few techniques of flying modern gliders. They're kind of specific towards the new two-liners, but they're also very much, you can put this into practice into whatever glider you're flying. And some of what I might say might go against what common opinion is and what common knowledge is, but and I might be wrong. I'm not saying this is the way it is. All I'm saying is that this is what I do, and this is what keeps me safe on a daily basis, testing and racing paragliders. And it means that over the years of flying, I haven't had a huge amount of serious cascading events, and I've yet to have to throw my reserve. So in my little mind, in my world, what I say is right, but do not take it as gospel. Take in all information you can from as many pilots as you can. Martin's going to be here and chipping in as well. And we may completely disagree,
to you to choose.
But that's where you have to use your own filters to absorb and just take in what you think is right. For me, to keep safe, to stay safe under a paraglider, the most important thing is training and practice. Training and practice. For me, SIV courses, that type of training is fundamental. You have to do it, and you have to do it regularly. Doing one SIV course is brilliant, that's the start, but that should be used as a catalyst to further your training. You need to practice, 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 and practice, so that when the shit hits the fan to you and you're halfway down a galley or in a canyon somewhere, you don't panic, you can make the right input at the right time. So training is really fundamental, and it's something that we as a community, as a flying community, we don't do enough. We tend to just say, okay, SIV, yep, I've done it, I've done a full stall, I've done a collapse and so on, that's it, don't need to do it again. But it's something we do need to train continuously with. So that, for me, is fundamental for a long, safe flying career.
I have a small input. What I find out is really awesome to do a basic acro. We call it acro. In my opinion, it's not acro. If you knew how to do a wing over without any single touch of the brake, you fully understand all the dynamics of the glider in every single moment. If you start shifting your body, you can do a ripping huge wing over if you do it well, and you have underneath the control the whole time because you are using only your body weight. These days, everybody just jumps on the brakes, do 1, 2, 3 huge ripping wing overs, and then they are in a huge trouble because they have no clue what the dynamics are. If you stay with your glider, if you do a basic, nice wing overs with your body weight only, you will understand your glider 100 times better than you do now, because it gives you feeling in a thermos what the glider do. In a turbulence, you immediately know, because all of these things you will learn through a basic, quite simple thing, wing overs. And wing overs only with the body weight. It takes time to generate the momentum, but once you do get into the rhythm, you would be surprised how much information you get from such a small and simple technique. And it's all just about the dynamics. What he's saying is amazing, because then you start stalling the gliders and doing the spins, which is totally perfect for the SIV, because you are not flying them. And that helps you to read as well.
Yeah. So, going on to sort of real life flying, I've got a new theory, and well, it's not a new theory, and it's not my theory. It's just a common practice that we've been using for years, and it's all to do with our initial input. When you have an incident when you're flying, especially if you're flying at full speed, because that's when things become accentuated and more aggressive and more violent. Also, with big collapses, the way a glider recovers is completely dependent upon, well, the type of glider you're flying, the size, the angle, the angle of the collapse, how deep it comes. You know, a very shallow angled collapse. Piece of paper. A very shallow angled collapse is, that's our wing here. A very shallow angled collapse is like this. They're just the leading edge brakes, but not really the trailing edge. A high angle collapse is more like that. So the collapse angle and the size is really important. That determines how the glider is going to behave. But for me, what's even more important is the air that the glider is then trying to recover in. If your glider is trying to recover in nice, smooth, clean lifting air, the glider can just, big collapse, not a huge amount of turn, and it reinflates and flies away, boom, on this heading. And you think, my glider's dead safe. But that's just simply the air. You can have exactly the same collapse, and if the air that the glider is then trying to recovering is also in a turbulated flow, it's going to, shoot a lot harder. Okay, so the type of air that the glider's recovering is fundamental to the behaviour of the wing once it has collapsed. So in those incidences, the most important part of that whole incident is your initial input, the very first thing that you do. Now, unfortunately, there's no one input that works for every single incident. Every type of collapse you have in real life is completely unique. It's unique to you, to your wing loading, to the air that the glider is trying to recover in, and unique to your initial input. When we're taught to fly, and when we're doing SIV course, I teach SIV, and when I'm teaching people to make SIV course, and we teach ourselves to do induced frontal collapses, where we deflate the whole glider, any SIV instructor will tell you, hands up, do nothing. Hands up, do nothing is the perfect recovery for a induced frontal in smooth, calm air. Because we all should know that if we start putting big, deep brake inputs, we risk coming into parachutal stalls and taking a really simple incident and turning it into something a little bit more serious. When you're out here and you're up any creeks up here, or you're in the big mountains, King Mountain, and you're in big air, strong air, and you take a frontal, the last thing you should do is go hands up. As soon as the glider deflates, the most important part of a big frontal is your first initial input. And I suggest to you that when you do feel the air go and the wing goes, it's a big input. Okay? You bang your brakes hard to open the nose. Because if you don't, the tendency of a glider is to collapse from the centre and the tips can come forwards. Very simply. And the higher up that performance range you go, up into the modern END type wings, the more likely that's going to be. Okay, because we've got plastics now, we're getting a big area of drag. So instead of the gliders kind of rolling into a collapse, what they tend to do is flick downwards, create a huge wall of drag, and boom, the centre comes in. Tips obviously have less drag, and they will naturally come forwards. Okay, so what we have to do with the whole point of our initial input is to reduce the size of the collapse. So rather than 100% of the cord deflating, we can nip it in the bud at 50% of the cord and get that centre opening and stop the tips coming forwards.
We have a saying for these tips. We call them a double snake because they look that way. They just start going this, and they are really like two snakes trying to meet in the center.
Yeah.
And especially with the new geese, it's happened a lot of the time. And we said that try to avoid a double snake situation because once they meet, you usually get somewhere tangled, and then it's a trouble.
It's game over.
Or the kiss of death.
The kiss of death, exactly.
Could be too as well, yeah.
The kiss of death. So everything in big frontals is to keep the tips apart, okay? And that requires a big brake input initially, the first thing that you do. And that generally will nip anything in the bud. It will stop it developing into something worse. Worst case scenario, when you've made that big input, is, I'm in parachutal stall. But if you've been trained, if you've been practiced, parachutal stall is really easy to recover from. Put your hands up all the way. Once you've got the tips apart and you've got the span of your wing above your head, put your hands up and the glider will fly.
And do not push the speed bar. That's as simple as this.
Okay.
And you will. And what I found out, if you have
Do not or do?
always push the speed bar if it's not flying, because that's the easiest thing for you to recover into a normal flight. If you are dropping at the variables doing do, just push the speed bar and go it flies away.
If you've got your gliders in correct trim though,
It will fly by itself.
It will fly within 3 seconds of yourself, of putting your hands up.
And what I find out about the initial input is just as quick as you can, just really touch the brakes and don't do this, like, stay with the hands. No, it's better just bury it, just get into the farthest position you get and get them into a normal flying, like really good, and then just see what's going on. All right, it's already maybe clean up, maybe not, but you get that first initial pump because something is trying to hit you at front and you hit it in the same amount of energy on the behind, and that behind basically helps to open it hugely. And then you can figure it out with the whole glide, the side of it, what's basically happening. Rather than just keeping it buried, then we can get it into a little trouble. Just pump it and get it out.
Sometimes it may require 2 pumps as well.
Yeah.
We've, in testing with the Enzos and the R11s and the like, full speed frontals, the glider was banging in hard, just going into a small bundle, and you bang the brakes and nothing happens. You bang the brakes again, nothing happens. You bang it again hard and boom, it opens. There was a couple of instances with very good pilots last year where they took a frontal, and I'm talking about people like Alex Hoffer. When they crashed, they took a frontal, a little bit of brake, and then hands up with the glider bundled. And if you go hands up, if you go passive in those situations, nothing's going to happen. You have to bang the brakes. Okay. This is more specific information for the higher performance wings, the Ice Peak 6s and the Enzos and the like, but it can happen on any glider. So initial input is really, really important on big frontals.
If you miss that first opportunity to pop it, and then you go into horseshoe at that point, are you just going?
No, you bang it again. You bang the brakes again, because if it goes there, you just want to get the tips apart as quickly as you can. The longer the tips linger together, the more chance they've got to go in.
If I'm flying on bar with hands on the C's, do I start that motion with the C's?
You can do. No, you can. You can do it on the C's, and but generally, if you can do it on the C's, if it's just going to kind of a small frontal and the nose starts to break, then a C input is good. But if it just completely turns upside down, then the brakes is the better option. So it does depend on the size and the violence of that collapse. The quick jab on the B's does the same job as releasing the B's, coming off your brakes and back up again. So B control is quite useful. And whether your glider's got, even for the 3-line gliders, the 3-riser gliders, again, when you're using the bar, you've got all that feel and control on your C's. So I recommend, I've been doing it for years, and lots of people have been doing it for years, on riser control, is really using our risers. Okay, it may need a slight adjustment for you because it's a bit strange at first, but when you're using your speed bar, which we have to these days on modern wings, there's no point in having all this performance that we're making and you're not using it by not using your bar in heavy sink or headwind crossings and the like. So using your bar and getting used to using your bar is fundamental to improving yourself as a pilot, to making yourself more efficient when you fly.
And quite surprisingly safer as well, because you get a bigger range of the speed to work with the throttles.
Yeah.
When you are hitting the wall of the rising air, your speed bar is really tough and really strong, so push it even more, so you get through that wall. When you are getting into a huge sink and the whole glider starts deflating, you just release the speed bar, and that thing just helps you not to even have a collapse in any trouble. Because the speed bar, when you are on it, tells you what's happening on the front of the glider. And you feel it with your leg quite easily. And you release it, you get 10, 15 kilometers to spare before any troubles happen. And then you got the full range of the brake. So to use the speed bar is actually the safer option than any of you can imagine, especially when you fly through turbulence. Because the turbulence, through the speed bar, you will have the trouble knowledge before it even happens.
It's about gaining as much information as you can. And the 3 ways you can do it are with your feet on the speed bar, feeling the pressure of the nose on the bar. You can take the rear risers, you can feel the air. If the air goes totally smooth, you can release all the pressure, that's no problem. When the air turbulates again, a little bit of pressure to feel the air. And for me, the most important thing, the best way to get information from your wing is with your eyes. It's much quicker than feel. Think about it. You've got 8 metres of elastic line, you've got a soft thing above your head, and yeah, feel is really important. When I was taught to fly, I was taught never look at your wing. Never look at your wing. Use feel. Do not look at your wing. I think that was probably the worst information I was ever given. I think it's useful as a beginner pilot when you're doing your first few flights, you're a P1, P2 or whatever, and you're under control of an instructor. But in turbulent air, the only thing I care about is that thing above my head. So when I fly, my life is just that. That's the only thing that's important to me. And you can see the glider lose its structure, lose its shape, lose its rigidity far quicker than you can just feel it. It all kind of happens at roughly the same time, but as much information as you can take, the better. So by looking at your wing, if I'm charging full speed, I'm always looking at my leading edge and then checking my direction. And I'm crashing into people. People are flying out. I don't care. I just want to keep that inflated. Okay. So using our sight, using our feel through the lines, and using our feel through the speed bar is generating as much information as you can. So I suggest, if you wish, to try and look at your glider a little bit more in turbulent air and take as much information as you can. So big frontals, go for a nice big input, just to keep the span apart, keep the tips apart. Side collapses. With a normal 50% side collapse, the kind of general normal 50% side collapse, we lean away from it, we counter it, we pump it out. Okay? Or we collapse it, we let it turn 90 degrees, and we use a kind of wing over recovery. The wing over type recovery is the most efficient. It's the way you lose the least amount of height, the way you create the least amount of drag. It's the best method to use if you're in clear space. If you're flying very fast and we get, boom, worst case scenario, 90, 80% collapse with a high angle, the glider we know is going to shoot super hard and really fast. In these instances, I believe leaning away from that collapse is actually counterproductive and it makes things worse. Okay, if it shoots hard and you lean away from it, you risk getting completely twisted up very quickly. Okay, twist is a nightmare on a glider. You're disorientated. It's easy to then start pulling the wrong brakes and making it even worse, putting you into a spiral. And if that tip cravats, a twisted, cravated spiral as you're spiraling backwards, is worst case scenario, and it's those sort of incidences that you're going to end up throwing a reserve. So in very big collapses, the best thing to do is actually go with it. It's actually lean into the collapse. We found it in testing with the high performance wings, especially full speed, is because we're testing, it's like, oh my god, and you collapse the wing and you want to go, like that. And every time you go, like that, and the glider shoots and then it pulls you in towards it, and it all collapses and you fall past it.
Yeah, you get a collapse on the other side and game is over.
And then when you do the same collapse and you kind of lean in with it and go with it, it's
slowing it down.
So much nicer.
Yeah.
So on the big collapses at full speed, lean into it. Go with the glider. Obviously that doesn't count if you've got a cliff face there or if I'm there. Because I'm like that. I'm not watching you.
But if there is open space, guys, this is one of the strangest things I ever find out. The bigger the collapse, the faster your body throw on the collapse side, the nicer it turns out. The more you are fighting in, the real trouble starts. It's strange, but it's honestly, when I did the 2 lines collapses now, I barely pay because I thought, all right, I lean the other way. No way. It's a trouble.
Yeah.
What are you doing with the brakes?
It's just a sort of small amount of brake, probably this amount of brake, until you get a bit more of the span, and then you can go on from there.
If I jump into it and I bury the arm at the same time, you never do wrong, because the glider is not there anyway. Your hand is just basically pedaling the air. But when you start gaining any energy or anything, the brake will help to open it. Definitely. But you need to have a space, you need to have area around you, because you're obviously going to end up with 360 at least, or sometimes even 2 or 3 turns, and it's never perfectly recovered. There's always some possibility of small wingtip or anything, but it's the best to gain the energy, to get the energy, and to try to reopen the glider as fast as possible. So the leaning into it and bury the brake in the same time never did me any wrong. It always helped me out.
So how quickly does it wind up if it doesn't open immediately?
In a spiral,
Yeah, like it's
it usually won't get that bad, because once you start building the energy, you are leaning into a club side. The inner energy, the inner pressure of the glider start opening the glider by itself, unless there is a cravat.
Right.
Which, if there is a cravat, leaning into that side helps you twice, because if you are comfortable with a set, if you ever do the set, that's one of the safest and quickest ways to get out the cravats. That's what I find out. If you have a cravated right side, you do the set on the right side, and you just jump it, gain the energy, and suddenly you're in a set with a perfectly open glider. All what you got to do is just go and you fly away.
Personally, I would, in a real anger, if you get a big collapse like that and you get the tip cravat, then my personal opinion is that you stop the counter rotation. You don't let it develop past the first 360. As soon as you feel it going away from you, and it's like, no, that's not what I want, you stop it. And if it's not stopping, you stop it more. And you're looking at the wing, and if it starts to peel, then you come off, and you just have to reduce your likelihood of getting the glider in a spiral. By which time, normally, the beautiful thing about these modern gliders is that they do cravat, the tips do cravat, but generally when you get a big cravat, they work themselves out to a small tip cravat. I haven't had, in many years, a cravat that's big and stays big. They all tend to work themselves out to a small tip cravat, which can still create a lot of drag and spiral you into the ground, but they're not so much drag that you can't stop the rotation. You should never let it go more than 1 360 in a rotation that you don't want it to be in. You can always stop it. I mean, you might need to keep it in a turn for sure, but you can stop the nose down kind of spiralling.
Would you drag it all the way to the stall if you needed to?
You never normally have to, because if it starts to really dive, you just pull, and you start to come out. And then, of course, you're checking the wing, you're looking for the stall once you've got less energy and you're under it. But actually stalling the wing as it's here, spiralling hard with a cravat, why, you need to have a lot of power, a massive amount of power to do that. So I don't think that's... The major worry is stopping the spiral down towards the ground rather than the stall at this stage of an incident. You know, it's nipping it in the bud. It's not allowing something to develop beyond your control. Because after 2 360s of that kind of spiral, if you're not trained, if you're not practiced with it, you're disorientated.
That's true, yeah.
So I think that the sat technique is cool if you're over the water and you know what you're doing and blah, 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 blah.
But you really need to be comfortable with a set. You really need to know how it works, what is the dynamics of it. Because if you don't try it.
Yeah.
But if you do, I find it out is the fastest and easiest way to get any cravat out. But you've got to know what the set is about, you know, how to do it, how to lean into it.
A spin versus a sat for that?
What's that?
A spin also an option then?
Spin is never an option, because the gliders start getting really disorientating and it can work against your body and it can end up with the twists. So I wouldn't never ever do spin to clear out the cravat, because you can get into more trouble because of that. It's better to engage, keep turning the control and fish it out, pump it out, do something.
Yeah, with a stabilo line is very useful for that. If you do have tip cravats, normally go for the stabilo. You stop the rotation, you take the time, you look at your stabilo, you take it. Because I've been there flailing at lines, and like, but when you just take the time, look at the stabilo, take it, it's more efficient use of your time, and then you can pull and you can keep working up your stabilo till you see you're pulling the tip physically down, and then it will pop out. If that's not working, then you can go deep pump and just take the glider just to the stall point. So you look for where the glider loses its billow, it empties with air, and it starts to peel, and then come off. And then just do that repeatedly, and the tip will clear.
A question on that technique was if you're trying to reach and fish out the cravat on the right side, for example, are you how are you pulling deeper and deeper while maintaining brake pressure on your left side?
You can just sort of, you can work your way up the line. I don't know that exact technique actually. You're right. It's a good question, but you can do it. You can do it.
When you need it, you will find out. It's as simple as it is.
Also, now that we're all flying in these pod harnesses as well, when we get into turbulent air, and your inner brain is saying, shit, this is turbulent air, what I tend to do now is ball up. When we test in a normal seated harness. So whenever I'm in rough air now, you'll know when I'm scared in the air because you'll see my little legs come down and my little head come up.
Forward, yeah.
And I'll be looking at the wing. So I'll be balled up, I'll be looking at the wing and just controlling the wing. Ready, if I do get collapse, to go with the collapse and avoid twisting at all times.
Because that's the trouble.
So body position is really important. That's why we can get in trouble a little bit these days with our pod harnesses supine, full speed, boom! And the glider goes and we don't go with it. So really ball yourself up, get yourself ready. If you do lose complete control, the best thing, and you've gone through a series of cascading events, and let's say we're not in a locked-in spiral, because if we're in a locked-in spiral, the only way you're going to get out of the locked-in spiral is by counter-braking that spiral. Being passive is not going to help you, okay? It will just stay there. So your only option is to brake and get yourself out of the spiral, or throw your reserve parachute. If you're in a kind of collapse, shooting, surging, stalling, and you've just totally lost in the wing, what you tend to do is we tend to brake a little bit too late as it surges, it collapses, the brakes come on as it's back above your head, it stalls again, and you can just get in a bit of a muddle. When you're in that kind of muddled situation, the best thing to do is go, okay, bundle up, ball up, so you're not going to get twisted, and put about 25-30% brake to here, okay? Boom, and wait. Look at the wing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have to take control of your mind in these instances, because obviously you're shitting yourself, and it's very easy to panic.
In the air, going all over the place.
So it's really important to really take control of your own mind in these situations. Control, take your time, wait 5 seconds, count slowly to 5. Then you should be in a situation with the glider above you and in a recognisable state, where it might have flown again, or it might be in a parachutal stall. Parachutal stall, perfect, easy, happy days. Hands up, fly away. That's why training to do SOV is fundamental, so that when you are in trouble in the mountains, you'll have more areas that you'll recognise, and you'll be easy for yourself to recover quickly, as quickly as possible. Joe?
So, that scenario you just explained, where you kind of get your hands by your head, get into a ball.
No, I'd say a bit lower brakes.
Okay.
So you're here.
Is that going to work for almost every scenario where you can't recognise the glider above your head?
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Because
you're just waiting for the pulse to.
no, because you are lost. You don't know what you're doing. You're like, all right, no, all right, and you're like, boom, 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 and you're just going disappearing from everybody just because you are 2 seconds too soon, 2 seconds too late. This thing will prevent everything. Either way, you end up in something which is organized, and you did not mess it up.
Yeah. The other option you can go through in those situations is you could just stall the glider. You can just stall the glider and hold it there.
But you got to be very comfortable with the full stalls to know what they are doing with you, because they are quite radical move and you are falling from your chair backwards.
Yeah.
So you got to really know what's going on with the full stall. You just can't explore by yourself just because somebody told you, oh, that's fun. No, it's not. Honestly, it can be out of the control if you are not comfortable with it. But that's a huge help. You know, if it's really lost, rep, and hold, and hope. And you hope. And it eventually will end up with a nice flopping full stall. But it takes time.
As long as you haven't overstalled, though.
Yeah.
Because if you overstall, that can make things even worse.
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
Overstalling is if you take wraps
2,
bury
3,
the brakes
4.
and long, what happens is that the glider peels back, and it's the opposite of the frontal. The tips are behind you, they're flailing, and they can go in amongst each other. I've done it a few
They do the
times.
butterfly, yeah. It's a butterfly.
I've had it once where we had like a bow tie, had a beeline, the glider wrapped up, and then it reinflated and flew, and I had a beeline right over the centre, so it went to like a bow tie above my head. That's overstalling. So when we stall, again, you're looking at your wingtips. As the tips come back, as they come close to each other, we've got to come off the brakes. You've got to come off the brakes. A perfect full stall, especially on a nice peak 6, especially on high performance wings, even rush 3s and the like. We don't just bury and lock. We push the brake, you look at the glider, you see it peeling and starting to stall, and as soon as it does start to stall, you actually come off your brakes. And then on the brakes, and you're just flying the whole thing. The stall, when I was taught the stall back in the days, it was an on-off procedure. It was on, off, and it's just not that at all. It's a manoeuvre that you fly and you're in control of throughout the whole process from beginning to end. Doing stalls and being competent at stalls took me a year of testing and doing it every day. It's a long, hard process to really understand your glider in full stall. And I guess the only pilots that really get to that level are serious acro pilots or test pilots.
I want to say
get
the
paid
best
to do
way
it.
to learn the full stalls is to learn a helicopter. Once you know how to do the helicopter, you are very confident with any full stall or any stalls you are getting yourself into. But to learn a helicopter is a long road.
That's even longer. Yeah.
It's a very long road. But once you know it, you are very comfortable in no flying situation, any non-flying situation.
How to handle twists?
Twists.
I have a special. Can I say I have a many twists in my life just because I fuck up helicopters especially. The best way when you start twisting, when it's all over, you're like, oh my god, it's to get both hands in the same lock position with at least a little bit of brakes, at least here. Because the worst thing can happen to you that one side flies, the other not, and you are twisting and the thing just starts. If you put your hands together, the gliders basically get locked because the trouble with the twist, as all of us know, is that you lock yourself in it. You know, the brakes, everything is gone. You can't control the glider. And the best way not to control the glider is so he doesn't fly. So before you start really twisting way too much, and you can still move your hands, move them into the position like here. So you are in a kind of deep stall, but not really. And if you are going backwards in a strange configuration, the glider is not really flying forward, or one side is flying more than the other, you can eventually start untwisting yourself because you are not having any energy building through the one side flying more than the other. So if you are getting yourself twisted and locked, put hands like here, stop when it gets twisted, you know, you are twisted 4, 5, 6 turns, doesn't matter. And then you start working yourself, you know, I call it a running because you kind of really turn yourself. So you run with the legs, you kind of shake somehow, and eventually you start untwisting. And that small breaks help you hugely because the glider never flies forward. Or if it flies in a very slow configuration. And if it doesn't fly, it flies backwards in a very strange deep stall. But it never have that inertia of jumping into a spiral, which is the biggest trouble, what I found out. So before you lock yourself in and twist, hands around here. I say 50% probably, 40-50%.
And once you're locked?
Once you lock, as I said, you're flying either way back or forward, you stop twisting, you start shaking the legs. I usually really start running with the legs a lot to get something out because you have nothing to hold. So I run, shake a little bit, and eventually the body starts twisting by itself. Eventually, it takes a little time and nerves.
Pulling the risers apart?
Nothing. I try a lot of the times. The running was the one of the best because the running helps you to do something strange. You know, the body like and it goes. I have 7, 8 twists out like that. Honestly, you can work a lot of twists as long as the glider is not really flying one side or the other.
You know the guy last week who flying the Ice Peak? Yeah. Do we want to talk about what happened with him and possible scenarios?
Oh shit, I haven't seen the corpse. I don't know.
I spoke to Mats about that.
Okay.
And from what he told me, and I would say he did the correct thing. He was twisted in a full stall. I think I don't recall how he got into that configuration, but once he was in full stall, I've been in situations where I've been in twisted full stalls, and what I've always done is kept my wraps on to keep the glider in full stall. I've reached up, I've got my legs out, I've kicked my legs out, and I've pulled myself round at the same time with the risers. I've also done it pushing the risers apart above the twist, the lines apart above the twist, but whilst keeping the glider in full stall, because as I'm untwisting, I don't want, when I'm facing the wrong way, for the glider to shoot hard backwards beneath my head. I prefer to keep it in a full stall, get myself sorted out,
And then look what's going on.
and then fly away. You know, so in my mind, from how he explained it to me, he did the correct thing. Obviously, recovering facing the hill with 5 foot to spare was possibly a bit
Pushing it.
pushing it a bit, but no, I think he did the correct thing.
How are you walking the full stall while reaching above it?
By taking wraps, so that it's still wrapped in my hands.
So do you promote that we practice full stalls? Do you think it's a good idea that we learn to do full
SIV
stalls?
for sure.
I really do. I think it's so fundamental. I mean, I spoke to a few people last year that crashed. When Emil crashed on his boom and he got a big frontal, he started to touch the brakes and he was scared of full stalling it. You know, he was so scared of doing a full stall in anger, in action above trees, that actually he just took the crash instead of being, okay, full stall, bump, build my span, fly away. You know, so yes, I advocate that you practice full stalls, but you have to do it in a safe environment,
yeah.
with a boat, with an instructor, da-da-da-da-da. I learnt over the ground on my own, but I can't advocate that, mate.
Who knows me knows that I did the same, and that's not good way.
I hear varied opinions about what we should be practicing our SIV on. If we should be practicing on our ice peaks and Enzos, or if we should practice on, VHV2s over the water. Do you have an opinion on that?
I do have an opinion on that, yes. When we start as test pilots, we don't jump on Enzos and start messing around on those things.
I do.
We start on lower rated wings. We've taken on a new guy, young Fred. He's taken a year and he's about good at frontal deflations now on an E&B wing. He wouldn't dream of doing any of that stuff on a higher performance wing. The new E&D type wings, there's probably 5, 6, 7 EN test pilots that are competent, capable enough to do so. A lot of the newer test pilots that they use for certification flights would not even go near those wings. The new E&D type wings, there's probably 5, 6, 7 EN test pilots that are competent, capable enough to do so. A lot of the newer test pilots that they use for certification flights would not even go near those wings at an early stage of their testing career. Don't forget, these guys are already competent, very good pilots. So in my opinion, and I feel quite strongly, is that SIV needs to be learnt on a basic wing, an E&B type wing. It needs to be pretty much dialed on that. I mean, you can't dial it on that because I haven't dialed E&B wings yet. You know, there's always something new I learn flying an element, E and A. But get as good as you can on an E&B type wing, then E and C, then E and D. Obviously, you guys don't have all that time in the world to have that beautiful progression like I've been able to give myself and like we can give our new test pilots that come and help us out at Ozone. So I would certainly suggest for that first real experience of doing full stalls and stuff, then I'd do a few days on an E and B, and then maybe go to an old school E and D, something that you've got in your cupboard, you know, like the Peak 2s or the Mantra 4s and those type gliders, you know, the 3-liner type gliders, and then possibly go on to do it on the newer EN, you know, the new Enzos and the Ice Peaks and the like.
Express. Maybe this is a little later, but how are you supposed on inducing collapses on these wings with collapse lines? How is pilot supposed to get meaningful data themselves with the certification process with the collapse line and then flying on the valve?
The collapse lines just help you create the correct collapse for certification.
Right.
Certification is not a test of safety, it's a test of conformity. Okay? And the two things are separate issues. Okay? So when we're making EN type tests, the EN test states that a frontal collapse is 40% of the chord. So it's that is a correct collapse for an EN collapse. If you do 100% of the chord frontal, badom, turn the thing completely upside down, that's beyond the requirements of EN testing. Okay? Likewise, the side collapse is 75% of the leading edge with a 45-degree collapse line, collapse angle, so that you have 50% of the trailing edge. That is the EN collapse. It's not that. Okay? So EN testing is to test conformity. It's not to test safety. Do not confuse the two.
These two things, yeah.
Okay.
There's a huge difference. And that's why there are the collapse line, because, for example, with the two-liners, the A line is way too back, from the leading edge. It means that you do it too small, or you always do it too big. You can't do a between way. That's why there was an invention of the collapse line, because in that moment, you can do what you're supposed to do. Without it, it's either way too much.
What happens when you have your A lines very far back, for example, especially accentuated when you do a full speed collapse, is you start to pull the collapse and there's a load of weight there, and as you pull the collapse, what you're doing, you're accelerating the glider. So the glider goes, and then boom, it collapses. So the collapse angle comes in really deep, really high angle, and it's not part of the test. Otherwise, you have to, boom, super hard like that, which then kind of gets a good collapse, but because you don't really empty all the air out of the glider, it bang, smacks open again and surges again, and it's not how the collapse is meant to be. So collapse lines on two-line gliders are necessary. You can practice collapses without them, but if you do it enough all day, every day, you will end up in the water. You will end up training reserve. That I can guarantee. So I don't really... at trim speed, it's not so bad. It's not so bad. But if you start messing around with full speed collapses on a Ice Peak 6 or an Enzo or any of these Boom X or whatever, you will end up in the water unless you're super trained. And even if you are super trained, you can still end up in the water.
Because there is a difference. You pull too much and it's always too much. Unrecoverable too much. Or you just pull too gently, not enough, and you don't get the collapse out.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's a very fine line. And very interesting. Once you get there, you will enjoy it, trust me.
So, Russell, how hard is it on the gliders?
It's not too bad. It's not too bad. I mean, if you get into a cascading event and you get twisted up, you fall through your lines, you get major twists, spirals and so on, then you should consider changing your line sets, because the friction that happens in a big twisting cascading event is quite serious. All the gliders are passing load tests, no problem, but we have seen in the last few years various different gliders breaking during big cascading events. It's not common, but it's not totally unheard of. So if you do have a big cascading event with twists, and you're only flying a two-line glider, or even a three-line glider nowadays, because as in our strive for performance, in our search for performance, we're optimizing line sets completely, so that, if you look now, that your central A lines will be thicker than your tip lines and your C lines. So everything is getting optimized about how much weight does this particular individual line need to support. In the olden days, we had 400 kilo line everywhere, so we were just totally over-engineered. But as we go to optimize and to increase performance, we also compromise our own safety slightly, and it also means that checking our lines, I write the manuals, and I write in the manuals, we check the lines, we check the lines, we check the lines, we check the lines. And how many people check their lines? Roy? Never. No one checks their lines. You just presume it's going to be okay.
Can you imagine just...
Absolutely amazing. and I can't thank you from the bottom of my heart on behalf of the whole British community and on behalf of the Queen. I thank you all for what you've done.